The pressure in the high-altitude gardens of the frontier spire was thin enough to make a human lung ache. But Thorn didn't even flinch. He stood perfectly still as the first of the onyx swarm chitinous legs clicked against the obsidian floor. He wasn't reaching for a pulse blade or an energy shield. Instead, he adjusted his spectacles and checked a small, ticking chronometer on his wrist. Kale watched him from the shadows of the arched doorway, her breath hitching. She had expected a warrior, a titan of the Terran hegemony, to defend her honor. Instead, she had been given this, an archivist with ink-stained fingers and a soft voice. But as the swarm drone lunged, Thorn simply stepped 2 inches to the left. The beast skittered past, its own momentum carrying it directly into the invisible shimmering field of a localized gravity trap Thorn had rigged minutes prior. There was a wet, sickening crunch as the creature was folded into a space no larger than a ration tin. Thorn didn't look back. He just adjusted his cuff. "Underestimating a Terran is the last tactical error you'll ever make," he murmured, mostly to himself. The path to this moment had been paved with the bitter ashes of the Azure Reach. Only 3 weeks earlier, Emperor Solon had sat in the Great Hall, his scales dull with the realization that his empire was dying. The Onyx Swarm didn't negotiate. They consumed. They moved like a wave of living oil, indifferent to the ancient poetry or the 1,000-year lineage of Kale's people. The Emperor had looked at his daughter, his pride, and told her the unthinkable. She was to be wed to a Terran. It was a political Hail Mary, a plea for the Baryons of the Sol system to lend their strength to a failing throne. Kale had met Thorn in the sterile, cramped quarters of a Terran transport ship. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a man who spent his life reading in dim light. He was smaller than her, his skin pale and his movements calculated. He had bowed with a precision that felt more like a mathematical equation than a gesture of respect. When she had tried to bait him, to mock the honor of a species that fought with machines instead of spirits, he had only offered a tired, knowing smile. "Truth is, my people don't fight for the songs, Kale," he had told her while unpacking a crate of unmarked chemical canisters. "We fight so there's someone left to sing them." She had hated him then. She hated the way he prioritized logistics over legacy, and how he spent their wedding night recalibrating the spire's atmospheric scrubbers instead of acknowledging the weight of their union. He treated their marriage like a series of data points to be optimized. He was cold, efficient, and utterly unimpressed by the grandeur of her station. But then the sensors had screamed. The swarm had bypassed the orbital blockade, slipping through the Reach's defenses like water through a sieve. While Kale's personal guard reached for their ceremonial pikes and prepared for a glorious doomed stand, Thorn had simply closed his book. He hadn't panicked. He hadn't even raised his voice. He had looked at her with eyes that were suddenly as sharp as a scalpel. "A diplomat is just a killer who hasn't been insulted yet," he had said, sliding a small transparent mask over his face. "Stay behind me, princess, and don't breathe in." Thorn didn't wait for the guards to find their footing. He moved with a terrifying mechanical economy, his fingers dancing across a haptic interface he'd slapped onto the wall of the grand spire. The air hissed. A pale, odorless mist began to roll from the ventilation grates, pooling at the ankles of the approaching swarm warriors. They didn't stop. They didn't even slow down until their chitinous armor began to smoke. The industrial toxins weren't designed to kill instantly. They were designed to dissolve the organic adhesives that held the swarm's exoskeletons together. Kale watched, horrified and mesmerized, as the terrifying invaders literally began to fall apart. Limbs detached, mandibles sagged. What had been an unstoppable tide of biological nightmares became a heap of twitching, uncoordinated parts. Thorn stepped over a writhing drone, his gaze fixed on the command platform where the swarm Hive Prime was attempting to breach the inner sanctum. He didn't use a sword. He didn't shout a battle cry. He simply pulled a small, magnetized puck from his belt and tossed it toward a structural support beam. The gravity trap didn't just pull things down, it inverted the local field. For a heartbeat, the Hive Prime was weightless, drifting upward in a confused tangle of legs. Then Thorn punched a command into his wrist. The field slammed back into place with 10 times the force of the planet's core. The sound wasn't a scream. It was the flat, heavy thud of a mountain falling on a grape. Silence returned to the spire, broken only by the hum of the atmospheric scrubbers working to clear the poison. Thorn stood in the center of the carnage, his glasses slightly fogged, looking more like a man who had just finished a difficult filing job than a soldier who had neutralized a boarding party. He turned to Kale, who was still gripping her ceremonial pike so hard her knuckles were white. He reached out, his hand steady and warm, and gently pried her fingers from the weapon. His touch was the first thing in weeks that felt real, grounded, and strangely safe. "Tradition is a beautiful thing, Kale," he said softly, his eyes searching hers for the first time without the shield of his archivist persona. "But tradition won't keep the stars from going dark. Only the will to change does that." Kale looked at the wreckage of the swarm, then back at the man her father had called a frail necessity. She realized then that the Terrans hadn't sent a clerk to hide in her court. They had sent a master of the environment, a man who understood that the universe was just a series of systems to be manipulated. She felt a strange, fierce heat rise in her chest, not the fire of her ancestors' rage, but the cold, sharp clarity of his pragmatism. She took his hand, her grip matching his. The azure reach wouldn't fall. Not today. And as she looked at Thorn, she knew she hadn't just gained a husband or a protector. She had found a partner who saw the galaxy exactly as it was, a place where honor was a luxury, but survival was a masterpiece. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his, the smell of ozone and old paper clinging to him like a shroud. "If we are to survive the coming night," she whispered, "you'll have to teach me how to fight without a song." Thorn smiled, a rare, genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Truth is, Princess, I think you've already started."